Oui. Да, спальня, спальня. И пронеслась. оказывается. Ну нет. Я к этому не готов, если люди будут. Просто всегда не думают. Ничего страшного, вызвать. Ну что теперь? Нет, я не больно надо, я нахожусь. Апсис. Телепортация арт. Я смотри, вот тебе сразу куча вариантов. Телепортация арт-объект, варианты. Просто свет не думает, что это не стоит. действительно, вот это, я думаю, там, не счет еще. Başlamış değil, başlamış.
Все-таки всегда. Да. Кушай, кушай. Солнышко, солнышко. Понятно. Технологии. Ладно. Так. Замечаешь? Надо пиано подбирает, пьяную. Пьяную. Ну, можно что-то сделать. Нет, ладно. Если кто живой есть, вообще нет. Это бот у вас. Если живой есть, что-нибудь там пиши. Моргни или там что-то. Как это там делается? Это аудио.
О,
Hello and thank you for watching. I'm Jennifer Bowman with Olympiano, and this video will be a short tutorial on how to move the hands in and out in Bach's Musette in D major, one of my favorite pieces. So before we begin, I'd like to mention two things. First of all, many
Купон 2-2. 300 за 119 рублей.
Все вокруг болеют. Нет. Потому что у нас есть волшебная лампа.
A bowl of spinach ruins your results. Kaput, zilch, nada, nothing, everything gone. There's always going to be vegetables, not ideal. But at the end of the day, I'd rather you have vegetables than have processed garbage. That being said, when it comes down to a ketogenic diet, there's things we look at. And a lot of times we only look at the carb content of vegetables, which, in my humble opinion, isn't the biggest situation we should be looking at. So I'm going to break this video down into some categories. We're going to break it down by carb content veggies that maybe you should avoid. We're going to break it down by phytic acid, oxalic acid, lectins, things like that. So break it down, keep it simple, let's rock and roll. After this video, I want you to check out Superfat. Okay, Superfat has some epic products, but one of the things that I really like the most that they have now is a keto pancake mix. Now, I know this doesn't have to do with vegetables, but I recommend that you check them out. Their pancake mix is like none other. Okay, seriously, if you're doing keto and you want to be able to have a little bit of a breakfast treat now and then, I know there's a lot of different bakers that you can choose from, but Superfat has nailed it. So they originally started out making different nut butters and all kinds of stuff. You've seen them on my channel before, but there's a special link for you to save a few bucks if you want to try out their pancake mix. So special link down below using the code, and you can get your hands on some keto pancake mix that's going to change your life. So thank you, Superfat, for the support of this channel, and thank you for giving them a shot. Now let's talk veggies. Okay, carbohydrate content. That's the first thing I want to look at. So beets and carrots, technically vegetables, technically hydrates. Does that mean you should avoid them at all costs? No. See, I differ a little bit from some of the other people in the keto world. I feel like if you look at some of the other attributes of vegetables, you can actually give yourself a justification to have a small amount. I'm not saying you go to town, but maybe a quarter cup of cooked beets or a quarter cup of cooked carrots per day. It's not going to kill you. You see, beets contain nitrates. Nitrates are going to help out with vasodilation, help you out with more blood flow. More blood flow means more potential fatty acids being delivered, more potential ketones being created, as long as you're not going overboard. You see, it's less about how many carbs in a lot of ways, and it's more about how much your insulin levels are going up. So if you're eating a bunch of high glycemic carbohydrates, then sure, that's going to be an issue. Okay, now let's talk about one that I feel like you should avoid. I just wanted to get beets and carrots out of the way because people miss their carrots. And yeah, you can have them from time to time. It's all good. But parsnips, on the other hand, we're talking 14 grams of net carbs per gram serving. But the wild thing about parsnips is when you cook them, they become very high glycemic. The starch molecules change. The starch molecules have glucose molecules that are sort of close together, but then when you cook them, they spread out. And that makes it, well, basically create a surface area so that your body assimilates it faster, giving you a higher glucose spike. So I would avoid parsnips, even though they're a little bit deceiving, because in their raw form, they're actually not too terrible, but once they're cooked, they kind of get a little bit demonic. So here's one that sounds smart, shallots. Okay, it's kind of a funny one because we think onions, yeah, not terrible on keto. We know that if we cook like red onion, yellow onion, white onion, it caramelizes. So we know there's a little bit of sugar in it. So we kind of avoid it to a certain extent, but shallots have 2x the carb content for onion. Okay, so when you're cooking with shallots, you're adding shallots to even a salad or whatever, you're getting a lot of carbohydrates. So I would 86 the shallots altogether, replace those with a little bit of red onion. A little bit of red onion has enough prebiotic fiber in it, you're probably getting a benefit out of it anyway. So just swap out those, shallots. We don't really need them anyway. I love the taste, but eh. Okay, here's a fun one that you probably know is not keto, but I'm throwing it into the mix because it's interesting. Sweet potatoes. Yes, a small amount of sweet potatoes is going to be a nice thing to have. You want to have a little bit of carbohydrates. Okay, I know this is supposed to be the worst vegetables, but I need to kind of get a few things out of the way. The sweet potatoes are so rich in a prebiotic fiber that they convert into what is called butyric acid, which is a short-chain fatty acid that can help ketone production. I'm not saying that sweet potato is going to be okay on keto. What I'm saying is, if you want to have a little bit of a veggie like a potato or sweet potato, you're going to be okay, and you'll probably get back into ketosis relatively quick. Don't mistake, you're not going to stay in ketosis eating sweet potatoes. Anyhow, now I want to talk about something that people have asked me about a lot. Lectins are in things like tomatoes, they're in bell pepper, they're in nightshades, so eggplant, chili pepper, things like that. Okay, it's a little bit wild because lectins are actually a poison. The idea behind lectins is to poison insects that try to eat the fruit or vegetable.
Просто, то есть можно вообще что попало говорить, а еда вот и все. А еда это фрукты, остальное как бы гадость. Ну, не я что ли? Овощи это не фрукты, я не знал. Ладно. Еще раз я повторяю для тех, кто имбецилы. Фрукт это то, что деревом. Не является листьями, не является растением. Не является его даже частью какой-то. Это плод растения, понимаешь? Ну, по идее, да, это как бы жестоко, что ты... Но это растение рассчитывает так, что все равно часть плодов съест, ну, что теперь сделаешь? Ну, тогда съешь само растение, у тебя будет тогда хорошая карма. Возьми тогда вот дерево плодоносит, яблонь, ты, ну, или ты, если ты садовод, давай будем не яблони. То есть понятно, да? То есть если ты корову разводишь, если ты съешь корову, ты ее один раз съешь. А если ты молоко даешь, то ты будешь доить его долго-долго, всю коров жизнь. Понимаешь? Ну, просто по-тупому. И корова согласится лучше дои меня. Скажет, ты меня живи, да, понимаешь? Ну, как бы, или ты захочешь ее убить, что ли? Ну, да, он про себя так, да. Ну, он понял тебя просто, да. Ну, по-тупому просто. Поэтому растение, оно не будет очень сильно огорчаться, оно специально для обезьян, для всяких, для мух, для... Ну, он про себя так думает, потому что для животных всяких, да, выращивать растения всегда много плодов. Из них немного вырастает, но деревья вырастают, да, то есть, да, потому что если бы, да, но он про себя так думает просто, ну, наоборот, да, наоборот, да. Смотри, растения выращивают много-много апельсинов. Из них до земли дойдут немногие, правильно, апельсины? То есть что-то обезьяны съест, что-то там клюют птицы, там что-то и так далее, да? То есть деревья, у дерева вырастет еще может быть меньше, правильно? А некоторые растения даже приспосабливаются так, что плоды, ты их съедаешь, там обезьяна их съедает, или какая-то там птичка съедает их с семечками, какает, и они там вырастают. Понимаешь, вообще он другой через океан перелетает с птичками. Ну или я к примеру говорю. То есть, в принципе, они настолько, что они не против. То есть деревья не против выращивать. Так чтобы, ну, не против, чтобы ты кушал их плоды. Понимаешь, они для этого такие сочные, красивые, вкусные, мягкие, аппетитные там и так далее. Да? И для этого дерево, грубо говоря, понимает, что ну сейчас ты сожрешь как бы много всего. Ну, понял, молодые, мелкие. Вот они, нет, я просто объясняю, что это нормально, это не жестоко. А вот есть сами растения, например, овощи, или их листья, это вандализм. Это жестоко и тоже, ну, как бы тоже, по идее, да. Ну, он тебя понял же. Ну, не ешь тогда вообще ничего. Тогда желудочно-кишечный тракт вообще удали себе полностью от ануса и за шеи ануса, кстати, тоже. Да, полностью все вырежи, все, да, вот и все, и питайся солнцем, шмонц, хоть чем, да, понимаешь, воздухом, праной, хрена, да, души космические принимай, что угодно, да. Но явно, что человек должен, ну, понимаешь, ну, она про себя так говорит, она про себя так думает, наоборот. Нет, я тебе еще раз объясняю, да, мне насрать, что вы имбецилы, я тебе еще раз объясняю, что вот это еда для человека, и это, вот, человеку надо что-то есть, и вот это еда. Все остальное отрава. Едой не является в большей или меньшей степени. Но поскольку у человека неадекватные реакции, ну, то есть, то есть химически далек, ну, неважно, да, про себя говорить. Я тебе еще раз объясняю, что они хотят сказать, что медицина хочет знать, что, да, она поняла тебя просто, да. Можешь голову не ломать, просто, да. Я тебе говорю, что они все будут неправы. И, да, что практически на 100%, что еда это фрукты. Все остальное это дрянь. Просто, ну, но это я не к тому, что говорю, чтобы там что-то делать или что-то не делать, там, мне это начихать. Я тебе говорю, как, да. Ну, что вот так вот, как я. Да. Вот я про это говорю, но ты не проживешь на фруктах. Ну, наверное, если ты же женщина, тебе же не надо много, тебе мозги-то не нужны, правильно? Вот женщинам-то может и так. Ну, я так чисто гипотетически. Или одно другого стоит, может и надо. Но если тебе работать не надо, ну, все равно тебе надо будет надо. Может и так. Нет, это не вопрос того, что какое-то питание или не питание. Потому что, да, вот военным и динозаврам надо много жрать. Понимаешь? Потому что у них мускулы работают. Потому что это уже приходит. Да. Ну, уж извините. Да. Мне это не касается. Не суть разговора, я вообще не об этом говорю. Я просто говорю, что да, что это не поддерживается эволюционно. То есть, если ты не поддерживается здоровьем человека, если человек, короче, поддерживается ничем, делами, ничем, понимаешь? Но это не КПД, это значит, что ты сильно не КПД, и твой прицел очень сильно сбит. Если он у тебя сбит на овощи, имей в виду, что он сбит, потому что овощи это тоже не еда. Ты можешь ими питаться, но ты знаешь, что это не еда. Делай выводы. Вот, да, понимаешь. Да. Ну, даже так, да. Да. Меня это не волнует.
Okay, so what do we do in this case? Like, is it going to pass? Well, there's some interesting research, okay? To some degree, lectins do affect us. There's a study that was published in the journal Phytochemistry that found that when insects eat lectins, they end up having a disruption.
Ты такой делаешь дела, у тебя что-нибудь там опухло, отказала что-нибудь. Ты захочешь, да, значит, на любой диете посидишь. Ну, уже я просто так говорю. Да. Но это уж что теперь поделаешь. Значит, не помню, да. Не касается. Если жить захочешь, то было бы зачем, хочешь сказать? Вдруг выяснится, что есть зачем. На просто даже драть больно, когда.
Of the endothelium of what's called their mid, which is basically like our small intestine. So they're clearly having an effect, but usually pound for pound or gram per milligram or however you weigh it, they're eating a lot more tomato than we would be, right? They're eating like the equivalent of half a Volkswagen of tomato if we were to compare it to our size. Of course, it's going to cause an issue. Okay. Now, when you get down to the weight loss plateau side, lectins can impede weight loss. How do they do that? So there's a study that's published.
Что овощи это нормальная еда для человека? Что человек должен есть овощи, что ли? Серьезно? Не шутишь? Ну, следовательно говоря, ну хорошо, ну изъяснись тогда, почему ты не можешь кушать то, что является нормальным? Вот видишь, очень просто, достаточно, вот и все. Томат. Ну томат, ну, наверное, плоды. Ну это, да, плод. Ты тоже же овощ, тоже, да? Это тоже фрукт, по сути, да? Или что это? Ягода? Ягода же томат, да? Ну, не само, ну да. Картошка это тоже, это как бы тоже растение, это как, ну, то есть ты тоже убиваешь растение. А картошка не запланирована, чтобы ты ее кушал. Ну, какие-то грызуны, да. Она же невкусная даже. Да, то есть, да. У тебя же нет хряка там, так сказать, каких-то этих когтей, чтобы копаться в земле там. То есть, и она не аппетитная, ты ее выкапываешь просто как. Да, я понимаю. Да. Мандаринка, апельсинка, что-нибудь. Яблочко, там, не знаю, груша свежайшая, да. Аромат. Я так думаю, да. Любви, аромат. Наверное, да. То, что беременная, ну да. Ну, что ты делать? Ну, тогда туда убить, саму растение само убить, маму саму убить. Ну да, понимает он тебя. Ну, типа того. Ну, что поделаешь, мир такой, что теперь? Надо же тем, ну, и тогда что? То есть ты будешь летать как? И питаться воздухом, аурой будешь летать. Я проще скажу. Ну, она про себя так думает. Ну, да. Это, да, он понял тебя. Ну, вот это он, да. Ну, это, он наоборот, да. Это не важно, я вышел, просто не знаю, вот тут видишь, сколько всего. Видишь, как это сложно. А это вот просто, да. Но не слишком, да. Если будешь жить, чтобы есть, тогда будешь вот так вот делать.
Disorders that found that lectins can bind to a leptin receptor. Now, leptin, not to be confused with lectin, okay, leptin is the signal that the fat sends to the brain to let the brain know that we have plenty of fat on hand. Okay, so what ends up happening in overweight individuals, we have so much fat that the fat is overrunning the brain with leptin signaling to the point where the leptin receptors become resistant. They no longer, they're getting so bombarded with a message from fat that they actually turn off the fat signal altogether. So what can happen in the case of lectin, since lectin from tomatoes and bell peppers and nightshades
смотри,
can
ты
bind
же
to a
живешь
leptin
в
receptor.
своем организме. То есть, если, да, понимаю, то есть мировоззрение твое, то есть ты думаешь, кто ты, для чего вообще, бла-бла-бла-бла-бла-бла, неважно. То есть ты управляешь своими мнениями, жизнью, стал уже просто, да. То есть ты и есть организм, по сути. Если ты стрессуешь, то организм убивает себя, да. А почему, да, и так далее, да. И ты от этого никак не спасешься. Просто проще не стрессовать как-то. Да, проще жить ничего, да, головой. Да, долгий разговор. То есть, меня надоели уже стресса. То есть ты и есть организм, короче. Вот и все. Это одно и то же. Человек и организм это одно и то же. Понимаете, да.
Receptor, it can trigger leptin resistance. So although this study was in pigs, it's pretty interesting because it found that insulin sensitivity improved when lectins were removed out of the diet. Now, I'm not saying that lectins are terrible, okay? Because there's other studies that demonstrate that as soon as you heat them, it breaks down the lectins. It's really the raw components, eggplant, again, bell pepper, things like that, that trigger the issues. Once you heat them, there's not as much of a problem.
Все вокруг болеют, а мы нет. Потому что у нас есть волшебная лампа.
Other thing is that the British Journal of Nutrition had published a study that showed that in people, human models, it's really only people that are highly sensitive with things like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or anything like that, that would actually develop an issue from a nightshade. Understanding that we don't always know when we have those underlying issues. So sometimes removing nightshades like tomatoes and bell peppers, things like that, will illuminate how much better we personally, anecdotally, I don't do well with nightshades. I also have autoimmune conditions in my family. Now it's hard to address, but when I have raw tomato, I do feel really sick. I don't feel good. That's not to say that raw tomato is bad, right? The point is you experiment with this. If you've reached a plateau, then maybe removing lectins might allow you to get through that plateau by relieving some of that leptin resistance that you're having as a result. Okay, now moving on. Phytic acid. Phytic group of 6 highly reactive phosphate molecules that are on specific nuts and vegetables. I talk about it with almonds and cashews, things like that. But when it comes down to veggies, raw spinach and raw chard are a go. Do not have a spinach salad. I know it looks pretty with its little, strawberries and, all this like pretty foo-foo stuff, but ditch it, cook it instead. Spinach isn't bad, it's bad raw. You see, what happens is it binds to minerals like iron, like zinc, and like magnesium, which are so unbelievably critical on keto, it's not even funny, and it's already hard to maintain our mineral balance when we're on keto, let alone having phytic acid come in and stopping the actual absorption because it's chelating them. Okay, so point being, cook them. Cook the spinach in your eggs, cook it with some oil. Then when we get into the next one, which is called oxalates, which is another chelate compound, very similar to phytic acid, but a different pathway, we have things like spinach, chard, rhubarb, okay? So those are things 100% should avoid having raw. Interesting study though, which is the actual absorption of chelating them. Okay, so point being, cook them, cook the spinach in your eggs, cook it with some oil. Then when we get into the next one, which is called oxalates, which is another chelating compound, very similar to phytic acid, but a different pathway, with spinach, chard, once again, rhubarb, okay? So those are things that you 100% should avoid having raw. Interesting study though, the Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry found that when you steam things with oxalates in it, it reduces the oxalate count by 45%. When you actually cook it, like sauteing it, it reduces the oxalate content by 85%. So not steam your spinach or steam your chard, actually cook it with a little bit of oil or cook it into something. Okay? Put it in a saucepan with a little bit of coconut oil and cook it up that way versus steaming it. You're going to get rid of more of the oxalates. Now, what else is interesting is that a diverse microbiome affects this tremendously. Okay. So it's a no-go. comes down to these, raw spinach and raw chard are a no-go. Do not have a spinach salad. I know it looks pretty, strawberries and all this like veggies. Raw spinach and raw chard are a no.
Chardonnay. Говоришь, что ли?
No go. Do not have a spinach salad. I know it looks pretty with its little, strawberries and, all this like pretty foo-foo stuff, but ditch it, cook it instead. Spinach isn't bad, it's bad raw. See, what happens is it binds to minerals like iron, like zinc, and like magnesium, which are so unbelievably critical on keto, it's not even funny. And it's already hard to maintain a balance when we're on keto, let alone having phytic acid coming in and stopping the actual absorption of those because it's chelating them. Okay, so point being, cook the spinach in your eggs, cook it with some oil. Then when we get into the next one, which is called oxalates, another chelating compound, very similar to phytic acid, but a different pathway, we have things like spinach, chard, once again, okay? So those are things that you 100% should avoid having raw. Interesting study, the Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry found that when you steam things with oxalate, it reduces the oxalate count by 45%. But when you actually
Хорошо, значит, наверное, да.
cook it, like sauteing it, it reduces the oxalate content by 85%. So do not steam your spinach or steam your chard. Actually cook it with a little bit of oil or cook it into something. Okay, put it in a saucepan with a little bit of coconut oil, cook it up that way versus steaming it. You're going to get rid of more of the oxalates. Now, what else is interesting is that a diverse microbiome affects this tremendously. So there are a lot of people out there that will say, don't eat vegetables because you can't break it down. But then the data shows that people that eat vegetables have a more diverse microbiome, and they tend to do better with those vegetables. So it's kind of like you are what you eat, which is very basic, right? If you limit your diet, then you are going to be someone that's highly reactive to a vegetable. If you have a diverse amount of vegetables in your diet, your microbiome is more diverse and can handle them better. Your microbiome will break down phytic acid and oxalates. So if you eat a diverse amount of foods, there is a small chance in the beginning you have to adapt, but in the long run, you develop an ability to process that. And a quick note on tannins, one more thing, tannins and things like teas and sometimes raspberries and sometimes vegetables. We don't really need to worry about it because they're in such small amounts that typically don't affect our bodies. And a lot of times tannins have a positive effect, like sort of eliminating amylase enzymes or inhibiting amylase enzymes. We're actually absorbing less carbohydrates when we have tannins. Separate videos on that. I have a separate video on specifically talking about tannins. Anyhow, as always, keep it locked and home, and I will see you tomorrow. talk about the 16 mistakes. Why progress? All right, number one, not reading labels. You end up eating a so-called keto-friendly something, and it's not actually keto-friendly. As you start doing this, you're going to get better and better, and you're going to touch things, and you're going to learn certain things. But let's just start with the Atkins bars and shakes, okay? If you look at the ingredients, you'll find all the things that are not just not keto-friendly, but they're not healthy at all. They have this protein blend with soy protein isolates, which is more in the liver, and it will increase your estrogen, and it's GMO. So it could be traces of glyphosate, which is an herbicide. And the whey protein in there, which is the highest on the insulin index, and then sodium casein, which is not the best normal source of protein. But the combination of those is very, very inexpensive protein. All right, and then we have this thing called polydextrose. What the heck is polydextrose? It's a synthetic fiber, right? And they'll say that, oh, it's a fiber, so it's not going to increase insulin. And even the FDA approved it as being fiber, but the research is so new, and I know people who consume products like this, the results are not near where they should be, and they have bloating and digestive. And so any of these new synthetic fibers, I just would recommend staying away from them. And then we have an ingredient, maltitol, which is the worst sugar alcohol. I mean, it's recommended for diabetics, but on the glycemic index, it's like a 50. And that's just like way too high. It's the absolute worst so-called diabetic-friendly sugar that you can consume, and I've got a video just on that one sugar alcohol. And then they have vegetable oil, right? But what type of vegetable are they using? Soy oil, GMO, very cheap and very high in omega-6, which creates inflammation. There's artificial flavor. And they also add maltodextrin. Now, on the glycemic index, maltodextrin is one of the sugars that is even higher than glucose. It is the worst sugar that you can do. I don't know why they put it in their low-carb, keto-friendly bars. And of course, then you have Slim Fast, right? I mean, they play both sides. They sell to people who like sugar, and now they're getting into the keto market. So the first ingredient is milk protein concentrate. And of course, it's not organic or grass-fed cows, guaranteed. They use canola oil, which is GMO. They also use maltodextrin, artificial flavors. I mean, I think they used to have a different formula. They've been bought out. They use whey protein isolate, which is very high on the insulin end. And they use this other fiber called isomaltyl oligosaccharides, IMO. And I used to recommend it for various syrups and different ingredients because it gives you that wonderful texture. But it's going to spike your blood sugar. So you do not want to consume anything with IMO. And then you have other brands like Hilo chips. They have potato starch. That's not keto friendly. So if you see potato starch, tapioca starch, tapioca fiber, and soluble corn fiber, I would recommend not consuming it. I mean, even the soluble corn fiber, there's 10 different versions. Some have 40% sugar, some have 4% sugar, so you don't really know what you're getting. But even V8 now is putting the soluble corn fiber for V8, so they can say it now comes with fiber. The fiber is not from vegetable, it's from this soluble corn fiber. Now, I just need to say this really quick. The study that did the soluble corn fiber, and they said it will lower your blood sugars. Well, they're comparing it to glucose, so that's the control. So if you're comparing it to glucose, and it lowers your blood sugars more than glucose, then they can say it lowers your blood sugar. But they sometimes fail to mention that they're comparing it to glucose. So, number one, very important, read the ingredients always, especially in the beginning, so you get used to it. Or number two, not looking at the serving sizes. There's a couple points about this. Number one, maybe you look at the carbs in salad dressing, and it says 2 grams of sugar, right? And that is per serving size, not per bottle. So it's like per teaspoon. So who would use 1 teaspoon of salad dressing on their salad? I might use 6 or 7 or 8. So you have to multiply the serving size by the sugars or the carbs to get the actual value. The other little trick you can use is it's called the roundup trick. Let's say a carb has 0.8 less than 1, so they round it to 0. So if you increase the serving size, you get a lot of carbs, but not knowing it because of this rounding little trick. Then they can say it lowers your blood sugar, but they sometimes fail to mention they're comparing it to glucose. So, number one, very important, the ingredients always, especially in the beginning, so you get used to it. All right, number two, not looking at serving sizes. Here's points about this. Number one, maybe you look at the carbs in salad dressing, and it says 2 grams of sugar. And that is per serving size, not per bottle. So it's like per teaspoon. So who would use 1 teaspoon of salad dressing on your salad? I might use 6 or 7 or even 8. So you have to multiply the serving size by the sugars or the carbs to get the actual value. The other little trick that they use is it's called a roundup trick. Let's say a carb has 0.8 carbs. It's less than 1, so they round it to 0. So if you increase the serving size, you could be getting a lot of carbs, but not knowing it because of this rounding little trick that they use. All right, number 3, judging your success based on weight loss. Let's say you started the ketogenic plan and you didn't lose weight in the first week, and you go, wow, it didn't work, I'm going to quit. What you have to realize is that the first fat that's going to be burned is the fat inside your liver. Okay? A really interesting study that shows that you can reduce 50% of your liver fat within the first 14 days. So your body is going to get rid of that before your belly fat. So you may not see much weight loss initially, especially since you have to get healthy to lose weight. The concept of get healthy, lose weight is very, very, very important. If you don't lose weight and get healthy, you have to get healthy, then lose the weight. And you might want to let that sink in because it's a heavy concept. It is something that is very opposite of what people have been telling you. Your whole life they've been telling you just lose weight so you can get healthy because obesity is a health risk. Well, actually, it works a lot better if you just focus on your health because the weight will come up as a natural consequence of being healthy. And sometimes getting healthy takes a little bit longer, especially if you've been eating poorly your whole life. All right, number 4, comparing your results with others, like your spouse. Not a good idea. It's very discouraging, especially if you're a woman and you're comparing your weight loss to men because men don't have as much estrogen. So women have estrogen, and estrogen makes fat, especially around the hips, the buttocks, the thighs. So you can't really do a good comparison. All right, number 5, not consuming enough salt. When you're in a ketogenic plan, you're going to lose more salt. And if you don't add more salt, I'm going to recommend sea salt, not table salt, you're going to feel weaker. You're going to feel the keto flu. So add more salt to prevent those 2 big symptoms. All right, number 6, the cheat day. I don't know whoever came up with the cheat day, but I'm not going to recommend a cheat day on this plan. I mean, would you recommend a cheat day when you're married? Let me find out. Hey, honey, Karen, I had a quick question.
Yeah.
What do you think about this concept of a cheat day for a marriage? All right, there's your answer. Cheat days don't work in a marriage and they don't work in your diet. All right, number 7, you're doing too much or too little fat. Now, even though the ketogenic diet is about 75% fat, I found a couple interesting things about this that may help you. Initially, when you do the ketogenic, if you increase more fat so you can fast longer, that's going to help you. We're not trying to lose weight necessarily, we're just trying to fast longer, and that transition might only take like 2 or 3 days. When you start to get into ketosis and your appetite goes away, and you're fasting longer, and you're continuing to have all these additional fat, MCT oil, the keto snacks, the keto bombs are called, all the extra butter on top of the fat that comes with your protein, you may find that your weight loss is not as much as it should because if given the choice, the body will always burn the dietary fat before your own fat. So what you might want to do is not go low fat, but just not try to add all this fat to the meal.
and just eat the fat that normally comes with the protein, and it will help you lose weight a bit faster. But if your metabolism is fast, just keep adding more fat because it's working. Realize this, that if something is working, don't change it, okay? If something is not working, change it. All right, number 8, you're eating too much protein. Too much protein can increase insulin, and that can slow you down. Now, protein is the big variable, depending on your size, your metabolism, your age, if you're male, you're female, if you're working out. But I wouldn't start doing high protein. I would definitely keep it moderate, and moderate. On va développer tous les aspects de la fermentation. C'est bien fait. Pourquoi? C'est une bonne idée de ces légumes. So welcome everyone. I have a special guest, Dr. Roger Twelt is with us. And I don't know, you've probably seen his YouTube channel. He's all over the YouTube channel, especially with COVID-19 and vitamin D. But Dr. Twelt has some serious qualifications, quadruple board certified in pulmonary medicine, internal medicine, critical care, sleep medicine. He's also the co-founder of MedCram, which teaches students and clinicians all over the world. And I think you have over 1 million students who actually have been through your course, which is quite impressive. So welcome, Doc.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berg. It's a privilege to be on.
Awesome. So, I've been watching quite a few of your videos, vitamin D. You have quite a great information. I can see that you go right into the research hardcore. So I want to kind of pick your brain and just share with our viewers. So I guess the first question I have is related to what has been the latest research in relationship to vitamin D and COVID-19 as far as prevention and treatment? I know in 2020 there's just a lot of observational studies, but I don't know if there's much clinical trials. There might have been a few. I don't know. You tell me. You dove into this hardcore.
Yeah, so the clinical trials have been plagued, I think, with the issues of metabolism of vitamin D. So most of the clinical trials focused on, okay, here is somebody with COVID-19 showing up to a hospital. Let's give them a large doses of vitamin D. And hopefully, since we're seeing a huge association between low vitamin D levels and COVID-19, low vitamin D levels and poor outcomes, low vitamin D levels and mortality, maybe if we improve their vitamin D levels, they will have better outcomes. And the problem is that there's been a number of trials where they have supplemented in massive doses. There was one trial where they gave 200,000 international units to patients that came into the hospital. And really, they didn't see an improvement in mortality. They didn't see an improvement in time to a worsening. But on the other hand, there's been some trials where they actually have done this. So there was one called the SHADE trial, which was done in India. It was on about 30 or 40 patients, where they gave 60,000 international units. And they noticed that there was a reduction in the cytokine storm factors. There was a improvement in time to recovery. They turned negative on their SARS-CoV-2 tests faster. And so that was with regular supplementing of vitamin D. Now, for any serious student of vitamin D will know that when you take vitamin D into your body, either by supplementation or pill, or you get it from the sun, there's a process. There's actually a few steps in this process. The first one being where the liver puts on a very important hydroxyl group. For those of you who are chemistry deficient, that's an OH group on the compound. And that's important for the body to be able to use that. Well, that takes time, unfortunately. It takes a number of days, in fact. And so some researchers have said, well, maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's taking so long that it's not helping. And so there was a group in Spain that decided to take vitamin D already with the hydroxyl group on it, called citadiol, or 25-hydroxy vitamin D. And they did a study that showed a significant reduction in the number of people that had to be admitted to the intensive care unit They followed up with a larger trial, which also showed some benefit, but there were some issues with the randomization. It was sort of a problem. And since that time, a lot of the studies that have been on the regular vitamin D and this 25 hydroxy. I should note to people listening is that 25 hydroxy vitamin D is not available over the counter. It's only available as a prescription because it's used in patients with kidney problems and things of that nature. So that's kind of where we are right now with randomized controlled trials, at least for those that are being hospitalized and very sick.
Is that type of vitamin D? It's less steps in conversion to the active form. I think it doesn't need the liver to be converted because it's already. I think it just has one step in the liver.
That's correct. Okay. So the way I remember this, it's kind of crazy, but the 25 hydroxy vitamin D, I remember that's the liver one because 2 + 5 is 7, and there's 7 lobes to the liver. That might not make sense to people, but. But the 1 hydroxy is really the last step. It's the one that puts the finishing touches on it. The kidney is where this happens for calcium metabolism. But interestingly, we're finding out that white blood cells have that ability to hydroxylate at the 1 position as well. And so white blood cells, which are, of course, a key component of the immune system, can take this 25 hydroxy vitamin D as the starting material and instantly convert it into the active form and use it for itself. So yeah, so 1,25 dihydroxy vitamin D is the very, very active form. And you never really want to take that. That could, if you take too much of it, it could kill you just based on hypercalcemia. So taking regular vitamin D over the counter on a regular basis is the way to go, and let your body metabolize it as it needs to.
Got it. And as far as the research of vitamin D in the different parts of the immune system, it's quite widespread, isn't it? I mean, it's such a spectrum. It does a lot.
Yeah, and to talk about the receptors, you have to sort of back up a little bit and talk about what vitamin D is and what it looks like. Anybody that goes to Google and types in vitamin D chemical structure will see very quickly that the structure resembles that of very powerful hormones in the body like testosterone, estrogen, cortisol. All of these steroid hormones work by going into the nucleus of the cell in question and changing how the cell transcribes its DNA into RNA and then finally the RNA into protein. So it changes the way the cells actually behave. So vitamin D is not just this vitamin that you need to take to make your enzymes work. It actually has very complicated and very profound effects on cells.
So it's kind of a hormone-like compound.
Yes.
If we, and this is kind of a side question that I'm just curious about. I don't know if you know much about this, but if we take a look at cortisol and vitamin D, both of them have some similar actions. They're both anti-inflammatories. They both suppress hyper state of the immune system. But correct me if I'm wrong, but cortisol tends to just kind of put the entire immune system to sleep, doesn't it? I mean, it just inactivates the whole immune system.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's true with vitamin D.
That's not. So vitamin D tends to be an immunomodulator. I think the structure similarity between estrogen, testosterone, cortisol, vitamin D, in that they're all lipid soluble, so they can go through membranes very easily. They can go through the nuclear membrane down into the DNA where they can affect RNA transcription. But after that, there are subtleties to these hormones that specifically interact with promoters that promote certain aspects of the genes. And I think that's where they are different. So cortisol will activate certain genes. Aldosterone, which is another steroid hormone, will activate certain other genes. And of course, vitamin D does it in a different way as well.
So then, does vitamin D help? Any research on the duration of viral infections, including COVID? Like, is there any research that shows it shortens the duration or intensity, or even some of the complications that can occur post-COVID?
Yeah. So we have a lot of data that shows that all of those bad things are associated with a low vitamin D level. And we have just a few studies that seem to show that supplementation, so intervention with vitamin D, does cut down the amount of time someone is positive, does cut down on the number of cytokine factors. That was the SHADE study. But we do, and that's what I'm aware of in COVID-19. But we are aware of how vitamin D can outside of COVID. So if we're talking about the flu, if we're talking about chest infection, there is a world of data there that shows that, yes, supplementation with vitamin D does cut down not only on the time, but also on the incidence of some of those infections.
Especially since the flu normally occurs in the winter or the late fall. Obviously, it sounds like a good correlation between most people are low in vitamin D, so they might be more susceptible.
Right, yeah. So for instance, there was in the British Medical Journal published in 2018, a landmark study that was published by Dr. Martineau. It was a meta-analysis of 25 randomized placebo-controlled trials that showed that people who supplement at a reasonable level, so that in this case it was about 25 micrograms, which works out to be about, I believe, 400 international units, so not very much. When they supplemented on a regular basis, on a daily basis, he was able to show that over a period of time, it cut down on the amount of acute chest infections in those patients. There's an Irish study called TILDA, it's a longevity study. It showed that vitamin D supplementation cut down on acute chest infections by 50%. And then finally, there was a study in Japan where they gave vitamin D supplementation not to old people in nursing homes, but to young children in schools. And they were able to show over a winter season that there was a significant reduction in the number of positive tests for influenza.
Wow. You know, I don't understand why they have the way they test vitamin D is different units, and when they test your blood versus when they're talking about taking vitamin D, it's international units. So,
yeah,
why would they use those two different units? It's just so confusing to people. Like,
yeah, I know, and it's the same thing with blood glucose. Like, if you were to go to the United Kingdom and talk about blood glucose, they would be talking in terms of single digits. Like, is your glucose 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? And of course, what? No, that's all very low. No, we're talking 80s, 90s. So the one that we're used to here in the United States is the nanograms per milliliter, and that's where you'll see most of the data. But if you read, European studies, they'll talk about milligrams per liter. So it's all off. And so when you see these numbers, you've got to sort of convert them. I'm used to the nanograms per milliliter, and for that, generally speaking, the lab will tell you that 30 is the cutoff. But from the data that I've seen with COVID, I prefer to have my levels closer to 50.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Now, in actual experience, you work with people. I think in emergency room setting, or just.
So I'm the critical care physician, so I take care of all the patients in the ICU, and obviously sometimes I got to go down and see them in the emergency room, so I'll see them there. Sometimes I've got to go see them on the floor to see whether or not they need to come to the intensive care unit. So I'm all over the hospital.
Wow. So from your experience, just with observing vitamin D in any type of changes with patients you've seen, not even looking at studies, what are you seeing?
Yeah, personally, early on we started checking vitamin D levels, and I would say 90% of the people that were coming in for COVID-19 that were severe enough to need to go on oxygen, they were all deficient. So we're talking less than 30. I could count on one hand throughout the entire year the number of patients that I saw coming in with normal vitamin D levels, but coming in requiring oxygen. So it does happen. It's not a fail-safe. It's not, you don't become COVID-proof, but it certainly shifts, I believe, the balance.
Absolutely. What's your thought on, is it possible to get your vitamin D through food?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's there are certain foods, certain meats, egg yolks, mushrooms. It's possible. I would say that the majority of us get vitamin D from the sun. That's where the majority of vitamin D is made, especially if you're young, if you happen to have lighter skin, and if you're outside, that's where you're going to get the majority of your vitamin D.
Right. But of course, the majority of the population has, they're overweight, and they probably don't go out in the sun much. Even kids now, they're not getting out there. So unless they're probably eating fatty fish.
Yeah.
Рассветы
Here's
смотрим
the other
какие-то
question. Some of the recommendations by certain groups will say that you need about 600 to 800 IUs.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to change, since I think we need a little bit more than that?
Here's the problem. All all of the research really before 2018 was involved with calcium metabolism. So we know very well how much vitamin D we need as an absolute minimum to make sure that our calcium metabolism is working just fine. The problem is that we're not talking about calcium metabolism here. We're talking about immune health. And so it's kind of like saying that you need so much to make muffins and assuming that that's how much flour you need to make any bread product, right? It's different. So what you need for calcium metabolism may be different than what you need for good immune health.
Exactly. So what about insulin resistance and vitamin D absorption as it relates to maybe metabolic syndrome? The need goes up, obviously. That's probably one thing to look at as far as if someone has insulin resistance, they're overweight, and they have maybe darker skin. What type of dosage would you recommend for people? I know there's you have the perfect person who's healthy and they have no other issues. They probably do a certain amount, but I mean, there's becoming a problem with the barriers of absorption. You have people with gut problems and
So all of that. So the biggest thing, three big things that will increase your need for supplementation is number one, age. As we get older, our skin is less efficient at making vitamin D. Of course, we make vitamin D when our skin is hit with ultraviolet B radiation. And because of the nature of ultraviolet radiation, that typically happens between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. So the sun's got it pretty high in the sky because ultraviolet doesn't go through the atmosphere very well. So that's age. That's number one. Number two is skin color. So obviously, the more melanin you have in between the outside of the skin and the dermis, which is where vitamin D is made, then it's going to take a little bit more time for that to happen. And then finally, three, like you just mentioned, obesity. There are some studies that have shown, at least from an oral supplementation standard, that if your BMI, let's say the reference is a BMI between 20 and 25, that's normal weight. If your BMI is between 25 and 30, the studies have shown that you need to take, on average, 1.5 times the supplementation dose to get the same increase in vitamin D that somebody in the BMI of 20 to 25 would. And if your BMI is 30 or more, so if you're actually obese clinically, it's up to 3 times the amount of vitamin D that you would need to take to be able to increase your dose. So just to sort of back off a little bit there, generally speaking, let's say you were taking a low level of vitamin D. If you were to take 1,000 international units of vitamin D, you could expect your levels to go up by 5 points. If you were taking no supplementation at all. If you were already taking supplementation, you were to say increase the amount of supplementation you were taking by 1,000, you would not go up by the same 4 points. You would go up by only a point. So there's these things. It's non-linear. The more vitamin D you take, the more you have to take for it to go up. And that's why it's very difficult to really overdose on vitamin D. It's probably one of the most difficult fat-soluble vitamins to overdose on. It can happen. You've got to be careful. You don't want to be taking too much, but it's difficult to overdose on.
Let's say you take someone with metabolic syndrome, they're overweight, they're older. Would you think that 10,000 IUs would be excessive, or would that be reasonable?
I think it could be reasonable. Let me tell you what the official endocrinology societies say. And they're pretty conservative, as you can imagine. They say that if somebody is at risk for vitamin D deficiency, just like the person you mentioned, they say it's safe to take up to about 4,000 international units on a daily basis without having physician or healthcare provider supervision. In other words, getting your levels checked. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to run into vitamin D toxicity taking 4,000 international units a day. Now, if you're taking 10,000, I've never seen any with vitamin D excess taking 10,000 units a day. I think you probably would be running afoul if you hit 50,000 a day. But I would stick with the official recommendations of 4,000. Any more than 4,000, you probably should be getting levels checked and making sure.
Now, as far as the complications or the toxicity of vitamin D, let's say someone was, because there's several studies that I was looking at that some people were taking like 200,000 or 300,000 over months. So the risk of getting hypercalcemia, right? And that obviously, you have kidney stones.
Right. So Yeah, so basically increases calcium. And so this is a good point to mention, by the way. There are certain people, because of their illnesses, that have a tendency to have higher vitamin D levels in the first place. And they may not know this, but people with sarcoid, that's a autoimmune condition where your body makes something called granulomas, and they are usually very high in vitamin D. Those would be people that I would be very careful about taking supplemental vitamin D for that. But if they're taking a lot of vitamin D, like you mentioned, and they're getting, the big thing that they would be getting is lots of calcium. And so calcium, so kidney stones, gallstones, these sorts of things could be a potential complication from very high vitamin D. Just to give you an example, there was a study that was done once where they looked at 20,000 people that were supplementing with vitamin D. And they were supplementing any from a very small amount to a very large amount, like you mentioned, 200,000. The author of this study was only able to find one person out of that 20,000 that actually had a diagnosis of hypervitamin D-osis. And his levels were not 50 like we want, but a few hundred. And so that was pretty significant and serious. But you can see it's also pretty rare.
Right. That's right, because sometimes people are nervous about taking over like 200 or 2,000 IUs. And I'm like, well, yeah, actually, it's not as common as you think as far as being toxic. Now, what about magnesium deficiency and people trying to they're taking all this vitamin D, but isn't magnesium an important cofactor for vitamin D?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Magnesium is a very important cofactor in terms of calcium and magnesium metabolism. So it's very important that both of those be taken together. Calcium is what we call a double cation. It has two positive charges. Because of the metabolism in the body is kind of complicated, magnesium also is a double cation, and so also should be taken with the vitamin D if possible.
Yeah, that's right. And because it's not as simple as just take some vitamin D.
Yeah.
How about if we're talking about vitamin D and COVID patients coming in, do you
Видишь, вот я сейчас
mention about zinc,
корень
for
растения.
example, zinc and vitamin D together? Because I know there's a lot of talk about that.
Yeah, so I can tell you right now, when people come into the hospital and they're admitted, at least at the hospital that I work at, and we have
Если
some
был
put into
растением,
the
я
protocols,
буду.
everybody that comes in, it gets put on 5,000 international units of vitamin D oral. Everybody that comes in gets put on zinc right away. And then obviously there's other protocols like Decadron, which has been shown to improve mortality in those patients. But I believe that zinc is important for those of the people out there listening that want to supplement with zinc. The one caveat that I would mention is that zinc comes in many different forms because it's a positive ion and it's linked with a negative charge. So you have zinc cholinate or zinc oxide. And so depending on what it's paired with, it'll label it with different amounts of milligrams. So what you want to do is look at how much elemental zinc that you're taking, and you want to make sure that you're not taking more than 40 milligrams of elemental zinc a day. That's really the maximum. If you take more than 40 milligrams of elemental zinc, you could run into a problem with copper deficiencies because copper and zinc are kind of metabolized similarly. So just make sure that you're not overdoing it on the zinc.
Now, what about if someone's taking like a chelated zinc, protein-bound zinc? If that's a little bit better than the elemental?
It might be in terms of absorption and easier on the stomach, so I think that's fine. But I would still go with the 40 milligrams of elemental.
Okay, great. The other question. This is like my own question. I don't know if anyone would have this question, and we just want to see what your thoughts are. Autoimmune diseases. You have vitamin D deficiencies in autoimmune diseases, and also the anti-inflammatory action of vitamin D for these conditions. But the question I have is there are vitamin D receptor problems sometimes with autoimmune diseases. And I've read this somewhere where there's the certain microbes even have strategies to somehow create a blockage or inhibiting effect on the vitamin D receptor because that's their strategy to overcome your immune system. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not heard about that, about microbes basically commandeering your receptors. But let me tell you what I have heard. And this is interesting that you mentioned about autoimmune diseases and vitamin D. I can tell you that in my family, I don't personally have this, but in my family, we have a lot of Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease is a GI disease that is basically an autoimmune condition. I could name off 7 different family members, cousins and aunts and uncles that have it. My sister does not have it, but one of her children, so my nephew, had Crohn's disease when he was very young. He had it very severely. He had even anal fistulas and things of that nature. And he was sat down, talked to my brother-in-law, sat down and talked to him and said, look, and by the way, I have permission to tell this story because he's actually blogged about this. He says, you're going to need to be on a liquid diet for a long time here if we're going to get through it. Liquid diets in pediatric Crohn's disease seems to work well. But one of the other important things that he did for him was he put him on a vitamin D supplement to make sure that his vitamin D levels were elevated, because his were actually on the low side. And he lives in California. Ever since he did that, he went into remission, and it's been years since any of that has come back at all. And he did that. My brother-in-law, his name is Sean Pittman, and he actually has a blog where he talks about this. He went in and researched it, not because he was interested, because he had to. One of his kids had it. And the conclusion that he came to was that vitamin D was essential if you want to modulate the immune system and prevent it from having this autoimmune response. And let's face it, in COVID-19, that's exactly what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an autoimmune response that overwhelms the immune system and causes the damage that we're seeing in the lungs. And so I believe that vitamin D can help modulate that and reduce the severity of COVID-19.
Wow. So, so you mentioned autoimmune in COVID-19. So you're talking about an autoimmune lung problem that develops from COVID-19?
Well, I'm just basically saying the cytokine storm fits under that condition of an autoimmune where the immune system is so overwhelmed. But the problem is that early on, the immune system is not strong enough because the inner response is not taking care of the virus. And finally, when the adaptive immune system comes online 7 days later, there's this tremendous, it's kind of like the kids, the teenagers had a party at their house and the parents have just come home. That's what happens. And you know, everything goes crazy. And that's the problem with COVID-19 is the lungs fill up with fluid and you can't oxygenate them and then you know what happens.
Absolutely. As far as the people that have autoimmune diseases, and also have you found any high correlation or seen this or heard this in like polymorphism, like a defect in their genes, especially for vitamin D?
So I have heard about some studies that have looked at polymorphisms, and it's known as epigenetics, where they look to see whether or not people with problems in their vitamin D receptors are also the people that seem to have the most severe COVID. And they did that study, and they did not find an association between the epigenetic issues of vitamin D and those that were severe in COVID-19. Now, they have done those studies with other genes, for instance, interferon, and there's a strong correlation there. People that have problems mounting interferon, either because they have antibodies against their interferon or because the genes that make the interferon are not working appropriately, it's very clear that those people tend to have severe COVID-19, no question. That was published in a very prestigious journal called Science at the very beginning of the pandemic. But we have not seen those results with vitamin D.
But as far as someone that wants to prevent COVID-19 or prevent the severity, is there any other natural things that you would recommend patients or people should be taking as far as things that can help to maybe increase their resistance or decrease their vulnerability?
Okay, so let me do a rapid fire thing of things that I think are interesting. So very quickly, there was a randomized placebo-controlled trial that was conducted in Iraq, looking at something called black cumin seeds. I think some of your audience may already know about this. This was not a small study. This is about 400 patients in this study, and it was randomized. It was open label, and they did about 1 teaspoon of cumin seeds per 50 kilograms of the patient's weight once a day. and they noticed its impact in terms of mortality, in terms of the length of stay. Black cumin seeds is a seed that comes from a flower in that area, and it's filled with thymoquinone. Thymoquinone has a long track record of being an anti-inflammatory, antiviral, antibacterial, and so I think probably more research needs to be done. But I look at this and say, what's the risks, right? What are the risks of giving black cumin seeds? And I think they're pretty zero. And so what's there to lose? So actually, to be honest with you, I've actually asked our hospital to add it to our protocol. And we're giving it now to COVID patients who come in as a nutritional supplement. So that's one thing. The second thing that I really find fascinating, this is
Black woman. И орешки.
needs to be done, but I look at this and say, what's the risks, right? What are the risks of giving black cumin seeds? And I think that
Черная ярочность. Едешь. Лятор и Куевич, точнее, это самая штучка. Кубоевская. Бэккарант, вы знаете, что это такое? А, скумель. Ну, да. Fair enough. Тмин. А ты который такой вкусненький-то? Боярский. Черный тмин. Давай посмотрим, что такое. Ну да. Не, иногда хочется вот муравушка что-нибудь, да. Нет, не хочется. Ну да. Ну, это что ли? Нет, если будешь доверять своим, понимаешь, если наркоман будет доверять своей тяге, да, если, да, ну, про это тоже, я тоже про это точно, это тоже так, да, но все равно, когда, ну, не знаю, думаешь, обман, ну, по идее, да, я сегодня, ну, это есть, на самом деле, вот эти, магазины, подойдет, это не, ну, да, по которой уйди держать. А, это что ли? Все, своем, да. Ну, все равно интересно, смотри, если ты заболел, и вообще пипец, что происходит. Естественно, ты жил несовершенно какой-нибудь, да. То есть, да. Не знаю, может быть, не знаю. Ну, умри тогда. Ладно, да, понимаю. На это надо время какое-то, наверное, да? Наверное. Не знаю, да. Ну, да.
pretty zero. And so what's there to lose? So actually, to be honest with you, I've actually asked our hospital to add it to our protocol. And we're giving it now to COVID patients who come in as a nutritional supplement. So that's one thing. The second thing I really find fascinating, this has really absorbed me for the last couple of weeks, so I'm glad I was able to talk to you about this. There was a study that was done by some Scottish scientists that looked at the United States during the winter, last winter, and they noted that they correlated sun exposure to mortality in COVID-19. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise. We're talking about vitamin D. But here's the kicker. The kicker was that this was high enough northern latitudes in the United States. They actually drew a winter for a couple of weeks, so I'm glad I was able to talk to you about this. There was a study that was done by some Scottish scientists that looked at the United States during the winter, last winter in 2020, and they noted that they correlated sun exposure to mortality in COVID-19. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise. We're talking about vitamin D. But here's the kicker. The kicker was that this was at high enough northern latitudes in the United States. They actually drew a line at the 35th parallel and excluded everybody south of that because they knew that sun exposure south of the 35th parallel could actually improve their vitamin D levels. So they specifically looked at people who were getting sunlight, who could never get enough sunlight to make enough vitamin D to make a difference in COVID-19. And you know what they found? They found that sunlight still improved outcomes in COVID-19, leading them to conclude that there is something in sunlight other than vitamin D production that is leading to better outcomes. Now, they looked at not only the United States, they looked at England and specifically Italy, and they found exactly the same results. Now, here's something, Dr. Berg, that I think is really interesting, and I noticed that you actually touched on this in one of your earlier videos, is that what is in light? We know that the majority of the energy coming from the sun is actually in the infrared spectrum. It's ultraviolet on the other end of the spectrum that makes vitamin D. We are just now starting to understand the importance of infrared radiation, not only in terms of healing and wounds and things of that nature, but new research is showing that infrared radiation can penetrate deeper into the skin and can actually stimulate mitochondria to make melatonin in the mitochondria. Melatonin is a very powerful antioxidant and is one that people believe may actually be beneficial in not only COVID-19, but in many different diseases.
That is fascinating. Happy that those papers. That is interesting because I did video on that, so I was wondering what other things, but that's fascinating. That is really interesting. So I really appreciate you coming on. I don't want to keep you too long, and for those of you, I would highly recommend. I'm going to put a link down below Dr. Schwelt's YouTube channel, and I think also MedPram as well, because you definitely need to subscribe. This doc has so much great data, and I like that you're able to explain it very clearly so people can understand. I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for your time and your valuable information.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Berg. It was a privilege to be on.
Absolutely.
Большинство людей не любят продавать. Они не любят делать то, что каждый делать приходится. Большое количество продавцов, они боятся предложить сделку, несмотря на то, что знают, что сделка – это то, что приносит деньги. В чем проблема? Дело в навыке. Да. Если у вас нет навыка, то вы, в принципе, будете бояться всего на свете. Без разницы. Ездить по гололеду, кататься на серфе, выступать публично, драться в рукопашность, тещей спорить. Так получилось. Да. Разумеется, у кого-то есть способности, но в первую очередь это все-таки система и навык. Меня зовут Сергей Азимов, я профессиональный тренер по продажам. Я приглашаю вас на бесплатный мастер-класс. Что там будет? Я покажу технику, вы ее используете, получите результат, получите состояние драйва, куража. То есть хочу еще, или а что так можно было? А потом еще раз, еще раз и еще раз. Вот так вот медленно, постепенно рождается навык, а вместе с ним и любовь к тому, что все называют продажами, а я называю это способностью влюбить в себя любого. Приходите на мастер-класс, да, регистрируйтесь внизу по ссылке под видео, и вы получите от меня подарок, шаблон, сценарий отработки заяв. Увидимся на мастер-классе.
Let's talk about the 16 big
Мы работаем для тех, кто не хочет отставать от времени. Смотрим 60 минут на платформе смотрим.ру. Просто наведите камеру смартфона или планшета на QR-код и смотрите 60 минут, когда вам удобно.
Сенсационные абсолютно слова только что произнес замминистра обороны Российской Федерации Хамид. Брифинг для военных
российских и белорусских. Фомин заявил, что мы подготовим войска к действиям не только в своих границах ответственности, мы должны быть готовы к решению внезапно возникающих задач по локализации любых кризисных ситуаций на любых угрожающих направлениях. Смотрим.
Может сложиться такая обстановка, когда сил и средств региональной группировки будет недостаточно для гарантированного обеспечения безопасности союзного государства. И мы должны быть готовы к ее
В новом сезоне.
Я всю ночь в клубе гайских преступных элементов.
Мальчики, аккуратней. Потерпите, пожалуйста, это просто процедура такая. Но в колонии поселения будет полегче.
Рики. Капучино с шоколадным сиропом, как просил.
Что-то не врубаюсь.
К четырем проблемам Макарова добавится пятая.
У нас теперь в распоряжении передовые технологии киберотдела.
Нужно взламывать, не нужно блокировать.
Монитор не протрешь.
Девушки с Макаровым. Новый сезон. 31 января. 8 вечера.
Ты что делаешь?
На ТНТ.
Усиление. С белорусской стороной достигнуто понимание того, что для общей защиты необходимо будет привлечь весь потенциал военной организации союзного государства. В рамках проверки сил реагирования союзного государства планируется подготовить войска и силы к действиям не только в своих границах ответственности, но и к решению внезапно возникающих задач по локализации кризисных ситуаций на любых угрожаемых направлениях.
О чем именно говорит замминистра обороны Фомин, можно понять, послушав заявление еще и Лукашенко, который накануне сказал про нацистов. Гордей, вы понимаете, о чем идет речь? Речь про стягивание сил ВСУ к Донбассу. Понимаете?
Сраживает обстановка и на южных рубежах. Украина продолжает наращивать силы, сосредотачивая подразделения Национальной гвардии из националистов-радикалов. Это еще похлеще, чем натовские военнослужащие. И это все впоследствии близости к границе нашей страны. Опять же, под видом того, что будут бороться с мигрантами. Это мигранты туда в страшном сне не попадут даже. Они туда не идут и не собираются в Украину идти. Это прекрасно понимают. Там свои люди бегут с Украины, а они будут защищаться от мигрантов из Беларуси. Спецоперация Полесье так проводится на границе. И уже до 10 тысяч военнослужащих на границе. То есть динамика такова, что идет наращивание военного контингента на южных границах нашей страны.
Волкову, конечно, трудно обвинить в том, что он нагнетает обстановку. Он, наоборот, очень часто старался смягчать впечатление, чтобы говорить, что у нас граница все под контролем. Накануне был на демаркационной линии между границей Украины и Польши был обстрелян белорусский граничный пост. Провокации уже начались. И, естественно, это очень серьезный сигнал, поскольку в Польше сконцентрировано не только на границе с Украиной, но и в Польше сконцентрировано большое количество натовских подразделений, которые сейчас там разверты на территории.
Еще раз, замминистра обороны Российской Федерации говорил про Украину.
Да, Ольга.
Мы должны называть вещи своими.
Да, конечно, он говорил про Украину, но надо понимать, что это же...
Мы готовы к любым провокациям на любых направлениях.
Конечно. В этом-то и дело, что концентрация идет везде от сил. Везде. И вот эти группы националистов, о которых говорил и наш представитель, и белорусский президент, это же не просто группы, это подготовленные подразделения, хорошо, которые взаимодействуют с силами НАТО. Нет такого, что они отдельно выполняют какие-то особые задачи.
Ни одно передвижение таких группировок без согласования с командованием на местах не происходит, потому что это пограничная территория. Соответственно, вот эти провокации. То есть на варе шапка горит. Вы помните, американцы говорили о том, что может быть вторжение под чужими флагами. Никаких чужих флагов нету. Они все там уже договорились давно, они уже сами знают, что делать. И провокации будут на всех направлениях. Белоруссия оказалась, да, там на линии огня сейчас. И надо, конечно же, и мы, правильно все говорят наши представители Министерства обороны, мы будем защищать границы Беларуси как свои. Потому что для нас это вопрос безопасности
Беларуси, потому что это союзное государство в первую очередь.
А вот я говорил, что батька там наш, а тут вот в эту студию, нет, вот там вот он так. Куда он денется? Закончилась многовекторность. Все. Только мы вместе, больше никак. Вот это, я всегда говорю, что вот точно будет так. Так оно и произошло. Сейчас у нас фактически не две армии, а одна армия. Белорусская и российская. Вместе. Да, именно так. И мы прекрасно понимаем, что угрозы у нас одни и те же.
Понимаешь, сколько ты не качаешься, да.
Мы прекрасно понимаем, что это НАТО состоит. И что, к сожалению, сегодня мы прекрасно понимаем, что это и Украина. И ее толкают, максимально толкают. И я не удивлюсь, что ее толкнут не на Донбасс, а вот именно туда, в Беларусь. Это вполне может быть. Абсолютно точно. Потому что они же не признали, кстати говоря, выборов Лукашенко. Они сказали, мало чего, мы не признаем выборы. Был такое?
Ну, электричество-то покупаем на 3 миллиарда.
О, да, покупаем.
Это очень по-украински.
Это у вас, знаете, понимаете, у вас зал отдельно, понимаете, вот опорах отдельно, вот все так. Вы у нас уголь покупаете, причем покупаете сейчас в большем количестве. И все у нас покупают.
Ладно, раз они у нас покупают, и огурцы покупают.
Поэтому меня вот это радует. Если как-то надо укреплять нашу армию, обоюдную надо укреплять. И с Казахстаном еще надо то же самое выстроить. Вот этот поезд, чтобы всем было понятно, что, ребята, дергаться некуда. Единое вот ДКБ, укреплять, усиливать и показывать им всем наши возможности. Тогда они будут сговорчивее гораздо. Я говорю, доброе слово, оно, конечно, очень важно. Уважаемое как единица. А вот если еще положить сюда, как американцы любят пользоваться, оно гораздо ценнее.
Циркун, вот вопрос, Алексей Александрович, что если даже...
Спасибо, Гордей, я вас не спрашивала сейчас, господин.
Я думаю, что то, что заявил заместитель министра обороны, еще раз показывает, что мы готовы к любому развитию событий. Более того, вот я думаю, та операция, которую провели миротворцы в Казахстане, показала нашу высокую готовность, нашу мобильность и любой жесткий ответ на возможную агрессию. Я думаю, надо вернуться к этому. Вот вы правильно сказали, что мы ждем ответа. Все это пока только нагнетание обстановки. Мы ждем ответа. 30 лет российская дипломатия очень, повторяюсь, дипломатично разговаривала, красиво отвечали. Это промолчать. Но когда высокопрофессиональный дипломат Сергей Алексеевич Рябков заявляет, собирайте монархи и давайте натовцы, это многом. А мы готовы собрать монархи, с американцами не могут.
А потом говорит, что вы воняете, как сыр Рокфор. Дело с вами иметь невозможно.
Смотрим, это просто. Наводим камеру смартфона на QR-код и скачиваем приложение. Это все, что вам нужно. Теперь все новости с видео, прямой эфир и самая большая коллекция фильмов, сериалов, программ у вас в руках. Смотрим бесплатно онлайн.
В Москву залетает, а в Волгоградской области на трассе возник затор из сотен фур. А на Камчатке российского туриста с головой накрыла лавина. Товарищи успели вовремя.
Андрюха, передай привет ручке, что это нахуй?
Спикер Госдумы Вячеслав Володин заявил о стремлении НАТО оккупировать Украину. Важное заявление на открытии весенней сессии. Даже в самые суровые дни блокады рука не поднялась сжечь этот инструмент. А еще письмо мамы, которое всегда на столе в день годовщины прорыва блокады Ленинграда. В Норвегии сегодня стартуют слушания о досрочном освобождении террориста Брейвика, который взорвал бомбу в центре Осло и напал на молодежный лагерь. Фонд памяти Кима Филби передал директору СВР личные вещи легендарного разведчика.
Каждая экспонат без привлечения уникальна. Взять хотя бы вот эту фотографию. Легендарный разведчик.
Ее сравнивает Эдит Пиаф, но она несравненна. Юбилей отмечает сегодня Тамара Гварцетели. Ее прекрасная контральта и особый манер исполнения достоинству ценят зрители. Начинаем мы с темы коронавируса. В России вновь обновился максимум заражений. Вот согласно данным оперативного штаба, за сутки выявлено свыше 31 тысячи заболевших. Больше всего заразившихся в Москве, 8 с лишним тысяч. Это максимум за последний месяц. За столицей следуют Санкт-Петербург, Подмосковье, Краснодарский край. От ковида и осложнений после него скончались 688 человек. Выздоровели около 25 тысяч. Эффективность спутника ВИ против омикрона составляет около 75%. Вот такое заявление сделал глава научного центра имени Гамалеи Александр Гинцбург. А при ревакцинации спутником Лайт иммунная защита возрастает до 100%. Новый штамм коронавируса омикрон стремительно распространяется по российским регионам. Он зарегистрирован уже в 30 субъектах. Новые случаи сегодня подтвердились в Омской области, Кабардино-Балкарии и Мариэл. По всей стране растет число госпитализаций. Так, например, в Костроме за день число больных с ковидом выросло втрое. Медики прогнозируют худший сценарий с приростом до 200 человек в сутки.
Привет, это Банки.ру, самый большой финансовый супермаркет. Банки.ру подберет выгодный кредит. Здорово! Банки.ру найдет ОСАГО дешевле. Класс! Банки.ру посоветует отличную ипотеку. А еще Банки.ру поможет вложить деньги. Банки.ру знает, где выгоднее.
Ну и готовят стационары к наплыву пациентов. Во всем мире за сутки коронавирусом заболели около 2,5 миллионов человек, и это тоже максимум за все время пандемии. В Италии от ковида скончался один из наиболее ярых противников вакцинации Луиджи Марилли. Ему было 63 года. Он умер в больнице, отказавшись от предложенного ему лечения от коронавируса. В Дании спустя почти месяц вновь открываются зоопарки, театры, кинотеатры, но у посетителей должны быть сертификаты иммунизации и по-прежнему обязательные маски.
То есть сейчас это
в Швеции ученые исследуют новую мутацию штамма омикрон. Она выявлена у 3 пациентов. Этот вариант ковида получил кодовое обозначение BA2. Данных по его заразности и опасности пока нет. К другим темам. Целый спектр направлений развития культуры обсудил сегодня Владимир Путин на встрече в Кремле с Ольгой Любимовой. Министр культуры рассказала о реставрации памятников, о разнообразном гастрольном плане театров и музыкальных коллективов, о развитии библиотек и музеев, о поддержке и успехах молодых кинематографистов. Президент особо поинтересовался тем, как работает Пушкинская карта. Это уникальный государственный проект, помогающий молодежи из всех регионов приобретать билеты в театры, музеи, ну вот, а теперь еще и в кино.
Пушкинская карта работает?
Пушкинская карта, да, это такой вызов для нас, для всех, и мы очень благодарны, потому что это очень технологичная, на самом деле, процедура, и действительно такой вызов для всех наших учреждений культуры. У нас очень серьезно мы работаем с экспертными советами, которые нам советуют из регионов, а мы это еще проверяем на уровне федерального экспертного совета, потому что ну, эта карта должна быть образовательной, просветительской деятельностью, в основном
в своих регионах посещают
На каникулах получается. Вот у нас, например, первый билет, я докладывала, девочка у нас из Сибири купила билет театр сатиры в Москве. То есть, по всей видимости, они собирались приехать с семьей, и она собиралась пойти.
Россия хочет более конструктивных отношений с Германией и нацелена на преодоление накопившихся проблем. Об этом министр иностранных дел нашей страны Сергей Лавров заявил в начале переговоров с главой МИД Германии Анналеной Бербак. Вот переговоры проходят прямо в эти минуты в Москве. Ожидается, что центральными темами станут ситуация на линии соприкосновения в Донбассе, а также предложенный Россией проект соглашения с НАТО о гарантии безопасности. Это первая личная встреча дипломатов. Анналена Бербак приехала впервые в Россию после того, как в декабре она заняла должность главы МИД ФРГ. Бербак прилетела в Москву из Киева. Там она вновь выступила с резкими заявлениями в адрес России и пригрозила санкциями в случае новой эскалации на Украине. Генконсульство и посольство России на Украине работают штатно, вопреки провокациям. Об этом заявил официальный представитель МИД России Мария Захарова. Таким образом, на Смоленской площади опровергли публикацию «Нью-Йорк Таймс». Ранее газета, ссылаясь на свои источники в СБУ, сообщила, что Россия якобы начала эвакуацию дипломатов из Украины. Как утверждает президент.
Прием даже... Да. Я... Ладно, нет. Это же весело. Серьезно, что ли? Что все работает идеально? Все работает идеально. Это есть на самом деле. Такому. Я прокрастинатор, почему? Сейчас через час. Не смогу через секунду. Мгм.